All right, welcome everybody. Here we are again to another episode of your favorite show, Lore of Warcraft. It's definitely my favorite show. All right, so as we start to wind down toward the end of this first, the first big chapter, but it's the second chapter of this chronicle, we enter a chapter called the Winterskorn War. Okay, let's find out what that's all about. For many ages after Loken's betrayal, the Titan-Forged who were exiled from Ulduar spread across northern Kalimdor. The lumbering giants gradually trickled into the mountains and seas around the region, disappearing from sight. The Earthen tunneled into the deep places of the world where they fought for dominance against a race of brutish and misshapen creatures known as Trogs. Many of the Vrykul remained above ground, congregating into small clans. Some of these factions wandered the harsh northern landscape as nomads, others established dwellings across the forested tundra of the region. A tenuous peace existed between the groups of Titanforge, but it could not last. In time, malign forces moved to assert dominion over the lands once protected by the Keepers. Among these forces were two of Loken's own creations, the brutish fire giants Volkhan and Ignis. Volkhan and Ignis saw the storm peaks surrounding Ulduar as a land ripe for conquest. Yet to seize the region, they required an army. To this end, the giants turned to the fierce Winterskorn clan of Vrykul. Though many Vrykul were warlike in nature, most avoided direct confrontation with each other. The Winterskorn proved to be an exception. These Vrykul had developed a culture of violence and aggression, due in large part to their belief that they would one day ascend to the halls of valor. They thrived on conflict, whether it was between members of their own clan or with nearby groups of Titan-Forged. Volkhan and Ignis took control of the Winterskorn by force and stoked the fires of their battle lust. The giants fortified the metal hides of the Vrykul with enchanted armor. Volkhan and Ignis also forged powerful weapons designed to shatter the iron and stone skin of the other Titan-Forged. But just as this new army embarked on its great conquest, anomalies began to appear in the Winterskorn. The Vrykul's metallic skin became brittle and weak. They had begun showing the first symptoms of the curse of flesh. Despite this setback, Volkhan and Ignis had no intentions of abandoning their campaign. They also knew that they could no longer rely on the Winterskorn alone to achieve victory. To strengthen the army, Volkhan and Ignis molded powerful molten golems and iron constructs of their own design. This massive Winterskorn army marched first against the good-natured Earthen, storming their underground lairs. The Earthen were utterly unprepared to face such an overwhelming and organized force. Entire caverns were massacred to the last living creature. A small group of survivors escaped the onslaught and sought the help of Tyr, Arcadis, and Ironaya, who had thus far eluded Loken's wrath. Incensed by what they learned, Tyr and his companions immediately journeyed to the Earthen's cavernous home to aid the beleaguered Titan-Forged. Tyr himself led the bravest of the Earthen in skirmishes with the Winterskorn, while Arcadis and Ironaya constructed defenses to ward off future attacks. In time, the Earthen and their allies drove back the Winterskorn. Although their attempt to conquer the storm peaks had failed, Volkhan and Ignis did not concede defeat. They returned to their blistering forges and created a new army, one even greater than before. Not satisfied with golems and constructs alone, Volkhan and Ignis crafted enchanted snares with which to enslave entire flights of proto-dragons. These creatures would serve not as mounts, but as beasts of war. The giants outfitted their winged servants with fiery weapons to strike terror into the hearts of the Earthen. The Winterskorn's next brutal assault shattered the Earthen's defenses and drove them from their refuge. The Earthen scattered across the icy mountain passes, but they could not escape their foes. Vrykul and golems hunted the Earthen on the ground, while proto-dragons assailed them from the skies. Even Tyr, Arcadis, and Ironaya were forced to flee from the Winterskorn's fury. Knowing that he and his allies could not defeat the Winterskorn alone, Tyr called on the 5 dragon aspects for help. The noble aspects grew enraged upon seeing so many dead Titan-Forged. Their fury only deepened when they learned that proto-dragons had been enslaved. Without hesitation, the aspects took wing and unleashed their powers on the Winterskorn's iron ranks. Much as they had done in their fight against Galakrond, the aspects worked in unison to overwhelm the Vrykul army. Alexstrasza held the Winterskorn at bay with towering walls of enchanted fire. Malygos drained the magical essence that fueled the constructs and the golems, rendering them useless. He also shattered the enchanted snares that bound the proto-dragons and set the beasts free. Neltharion raised mountains from the earth to corral and contain the Vrykul and their giant masters. Lastly, Ysera and Nosdormu combined their powers to create a spell that would bring a decisive end to the conflict. Ysera and Nosdormu enveloped the Winterskorn in a cloying mist that caused the Titanforge to fall asleep. These incapacitated creatures were then locked away in tomb cities across northern Kalimdor. They would not know the peaceful sleep of the Emerald Dream, rather they would languish in a timeless unconscious slumber for thousands upon thousands of years. In the millennia to come, the Curse of Flesh would continue warping the sleeping Winterskorn Vrykul. When they eventually awoke, almost every one of them would discover that they had degenerated into mortal creatures of flesh and blood. And there's also Trogs and the origins of Udamon. Following the war with the old gods, the Keepers used the Forge of Wills to create new Titan Forged to help them reshape the world. Yet their first designs proved too complex and overambitious. Rather than making the perfect servants, they had created stone-skinned savages known as Trogs. The Keepers quickly refined and perfected their designs, and the next generation of Titan Forged to emerge from the Forge of Wills would be known as the Earthen. The Keepers were troubled by the Trogs, but they could not bear to destroy them. Instead, Ironaya built a small subterranean vault known as Udamon that would act as a stasis chamber for the Trogs. Some of them escaped imprisonment and wandered the newly ordered world. Others even found their way into the domain of Earth in the elemental plane Deepholm. Alright, so just as kind of like a sub-story, you do see a lot of this in the Storm Peaks region. You see this spell that Ysera Nosdormu did to kind of lock some of the battles in time. And you also see how the real Vrykul, as we know them in Northrend and Wrath of the Lich King, have come about, that they were stuck in time, and when they finally came out, they were fully mortal. You see the dragon aspects coming in to really stop the Winterskorn. I think you also see the Winterskorn a lot in Wrath of the Lich King. Again, when we do that in the Let's Play, that'll be cool to see that. We see how the enslaving of the proto-dragons kind of enters the lore there, and you also see these golems and the creations of fire, how the Volkhan and Ignis did that. Ignis sounds familiar, don't know about Volkhan. I guess we'll see those kind of fire giants and how they play a part in all of it, again, in the future, and in probably Wrath of the Lich King expansion. I'll get into that the most. But it's interesting to see how even Tyr and Arcadis and Ironaya could not beat back the Winterskorn. Now they're not powerful enough, and it took the help of the dragon aspects to get them. You also see kind of another race, the evil race of the Trogs, how old they are, how they're older than even the Keepers. They're one of the first races, so they're almost like a primitive prehistoric type race, and how the dungeon Udamon comes about as their an original kind of home, one of their original homes, and also how they play such a big part in Deepholm. And when you do the Cataclysm expansion, there's definitely a lot of Trog quest lines there. All right, so interesting. This sort of is just some fleshing out of a couple little side storylines and building on the races, but really it's not. It's kind of like a subject specific, almost niche, like we've talked about in some of the other episodes. But we're drawing near to a close with the first big chapter of the prehistory section. At the end of that, we'll also talk about some of the things that don't get talked about in Chronicles 2, but that you can see in the greater timeline. All right, thank you everybody, as always, for listening to me. You know I appreciate you, and I love doing these with you. So I'll see you on the next episode real soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.